is important for education. It said that you can't mandate desegregation, so I can't expect to go into any classroom and see an equal color scheme of students. You can't mandate that. Rather, desegregation is about this question of legal access. So even though the schools were still segregated, it kind of clarifies on this separate is inherently unequal thing. It says, the state does not have the responsibility to enforce full total integration. Does that make sense to everybody? So we're kind of seeing a bit of a pullback on some of the mandates that we saw earlier in the era of the Civil Rights Movement. But once again, we kind of see a similar theme. It's about access. So 1975, we have the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, which was later known as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. It's a law that makes available a free, appropriate public education to eligible children with disabilities throughout the nation and ensures special education and related services to those children. So here we see the category of disabled people saying there should be full access for those students as well. Make sense? So we've had Title IX, we've had IDEA, we've had a ton of these Supreme Court cases about race. We're kind of seeing how access is being expanded to different categories and minority groups. 1979, the Department of Education Organization Act. This created officially the Department of Education as a cabinet-level agency. So who is our current Secretary of Education? Betsy DeVos is in the cabinet. The cabinet meetings that happen, I forget, 12 times a year, I believe, give or take. Who knows these days? There is a Secretary of Education in the cabinet, and this was kind of done to show that the federal government truly cares about education. The president is hearing from somebody on this issue consistently. So it was an important piece of legislation, but didn't have shake things up too much. So this brings us to our final inflection point. Can you believe it? We're already here. The curriculum. The curriculum. What does that mean? What's a curriculum? It's a fun word to say, even funner to spell. Yes?
It's what's taught in school.
Bingo! It's what's taught in schools. How many of y'all get syllabuses at the beginning of a class, at the beginning of each semester? Yeah? So you get your syllabus, it says you'll use these books, these notebooks, it might even have a week-by-week schedule. We'll go over this week, that, this week, all that stuff. The curriculum is literally what you are learning. Historically, who has had power over that most important question? States and local areas. So you'll kind of hear all the scare stories about the South. Is anybody here from the South? Yeah, me too. I'm from Georgia. You'll hear all these scare stories about the South. Some of them are true, some of them not true. But you'll hear like, oh my God, y'all's curriculum is really weird. Y'all called the Civil War the War of Northern Aggression. That's true in some places, not in all places, so don't think that that's true everywhere. But that is a component of the curriculum. It is the local areas are deciding we want to teach something in a certain way. So we will teach it in our local understanding. There were some fights about whether or not evolution should be taught in biology classes way back when. That was in Tennessee. So, it's all about the curriculum. So 1983, we're in the first term of Reagan, and the Department of Education releases a report called A Nation at Risk. A Nation at Risk. This argued that U.S. schools were not producing graduates that could compete with other nations. It said, quote, "We live among determined, well-educated, and strongly motivated competitors. We compete with them for international standing in markets, not only with products, but also with the ideas of our laboratories and neighborhood workshops. America's position in the world may once have been reasonably secure with only a few exceptionally well-trained men and women. It is no longer." What does that sound like the federal government is gearing up to do? Louder.
Regular education, like what specifically you taught in subjects?
Yeah, exactly. This report is looking at the history of federal education policy and is saying, hey, we've done a pretty good job for the most part of ensuring that kids have access to education and that kids generally receive an education. But what we've done a poor job at is setting ourselves up to compete with other students around the world. So, through the 1988 ESEA amendments, requirements on schools to teach certain things and achieve certain test scores were added. The amendments required achievement test results to be gathered and analyzed in at least 3 grades in schools receiving Title I funds, and established accountability requirements for these schools, including specific penalties if the school was consistently low performing. So let's break that down for a bit. Title I, what is that referring to? What piece of legislation? ESEA. Title I said that schools get funding, but that has to go to lower income students. These new amendments passed in 1988 required the federal government to gather and analyze achievement test results. It required the states to do that, and then they turned over that data to the federal government. Achievement test results, and it said that in order to get funding, in order to continue to get funding under Title I, you have to meet these standards. You have to meet these test results. So it imposed more accountability over how the money was spent. So remember when we talked about LBJ, how a lot of times that funding went towards, services that were not associated with educating low-income students. Now they're saying, hey, we're going to provide funding, but only if you do what? What? Threshold of what? Test scores. It tied that money to a certain curriculum and performance. Yeah.
So those curriculum, like the performance, was only towards schools that were affected by Title I, i.e. like low-income student schools, or was it all schools that were like public schools?
Title I funding. But we're going to see an expansion of that a little bit later on. So this is an important point. This applied to Title I schools. So schools receiving funds because they were low-income or poor schools. At this point, because of that fact, there remained an implicit understanding that the federal role should focus on specific protected classes and disadvantaged populations. So, as we can see, all of this regulation about access and even this new regulation about the curriculum and test scores, it was still targeted at poor minority populations. This began to change with the 1994 reauthorization of ESEA. So we see this legislation again, and this was known as the Improving America's Schools Act, IASA. That required that Title I schools adopt challenging content and performance standards, align their assessments to those standards, and establish an accountability system based on them. What does that mean? So previously, with those 1988 amendments, we had them attach the funds to test scores, but those test scores could be about anything, right? So now what does this do?
It specifies like what the testing has to do, like
I don't think this identified specific subject areas just yet, but it did say that you had to adopt challenging content and performance standards. So it can't just be any test scores, it has to be challenging test scores. So you have to kind of raise the bar in terms of what you're teaching kids, and then we need to see that those kids are passing this new, stricter, more difficult curriculum. Yeah?
Sorry, just for clarification, were these standards set by the federal government or by states?
Federal government. Remember, it says that it set these standards, and then it said that the states had to align with those new standards. So it moved the bar up, the states now have to jump over the higher bar. This effectively expanded the scope of the law because to receive Title I funding, states and districts needed standards assessments and accountability systems that applied across all schools, regardless of whether or not they received federal funds. So this gets back to your question, did this only apply to Title I schools? Back then, yes, but with this new piece of legislation, it applied to all schools, regardless of whether or not they received federal funds. Why is that important? Yeah?
The regulations are no longer tied to receiving funds.
Bingo. Previously, regulation and spending, that went hand in hand. The funding was tied to regulation. Now, the regulation is kind of free-floating. It's applied to all schools. So we see that this is an even greater expansion of federal authority over the curriculum. This, quote, began the modern era in which the federal government has directly influenced the educational experience of all students. And that was, just to briefly go back, 1994 with the IAS. Make sense? Any questions about that? So we're about to go to a new millennium. 2001. We get No Child Left Behind. Who's heard of that? Okay, just to clarify, more people raise their hand for I've heard of No Child Left Behind than I've heard of Brown v. Board of Education. That's why we have this topic. Jesus. God. Ugh. Okay, all right. What does No Child Left Behind do? Oh, wise survey population. Yes?
It's a massive increase in federal funding. It also requires schools to allow military recruitment in order to receive funding.
I didn't know that last part. That's interesting. That sucks. Okay. The way that I define this piece of regulation for the purposes of our era breakdown is that it's a lot of regulation without a lot of spending. So with the ESEA, we get a lot of spending without a lot of regulation. And then we see how the regulation continues and continues to increase. Now we see a ton of regulation without a ton of spending. So kind of key inflection point behind you. Who's president during this time? Yeah. Commander-in-chief, am I right, everybody? All right, so the policymakers who helped to craft that legislation did not really care about LBJ's original vision. So the No Child Left Behind Act, which is the present-day iteration of the ESEA, imposed a bunch of standards. The new testing measures that were implemented to measure whether teachers and administrators were meeting those standards have, quote, done little to help the children in the classroom. So the reason why is that because the regulation was focused on new testing standards, what did classrooms do? What did teachers do? Yeah, they taught to the test. So a lot of documented evidence after this was passed showed that teachers were focusing on test preparation rather than fostering an overall educational environment to, teach kids the things that they need to learn about the stuff. They focused on test scores rather than education. Now, why is that bad?
There's some evidence about push-out rates because of the fact that they take into
Yeah. That's an in the classroom effect, so we can focus on that micro in the classroom effect of if a teacher is worried that you're going to tank that person's test score average for that classroom, might not want to be in that classroom anymore. What else did it do? Yeah?
You can't learn critical thinking skills by taking a test.
True, but not what I was getting. Yes?
If the teacher needed like a certain percentage of students to perform well on the test, then he or she could choose students to teach it and not worry about their students within the class.
Yeah, if I only need a certain percentage of my students to do well, I can focus to a smaller percentage of my students. Ask yourself this most important question. What happens if a school or school district does not pass the testing requirements?
They don't get funding, so like the schools that need funding the most to make their test scores up, won't get it.
Bingo! They lose the Title I funding that they originally got through the original ESEA. They lose the funding. So a number of schools were forced to close as a result of not meeting testing standards, and many of those, not surprisingly, were in immigrant communities and in African American communities because they lost the funding necessary, and instead of getting funding throughout the past 2 decades, all they had gotten was more regulation. But that more regulation was just pass these test scores, pass these test scores, pass these test scores, but not funding to match it. Remember, we see an increase in regulation, but not an increase in funding. So these schools who never had enough money to begin with are now being punished for not meeting test scores. Do we see how this is related to a previous court case? We talked about a lot of them, so it's actually kind of a difficult question. But which one am I thinking of? Rodriguez. Access to education, for quality education, is not about funding, which is why we can see an increase in regulation, but not an increase in funding. The emphasis on federal testing strains states where schools remain strapped for money and the quality of education diminished in those areas. Because teachers just focused on teaching to the test, kind of as y'all out. Does anybody have any questions about that? Yeah.
So does the ESEA get exams like in a couple of years?
So, before No Child Left Behind, all of these were called reauthorizations of the ESEA. No Child Left Behind was a reauthorization of the ESEA, but they recalled it No Child Left Behind. So, like, change of the legislation, but also changing the name. Others were mostly just changing the legislation. Yeah. The main takeaway is you see an increase in regulation without an increase in spending. And the kind of huge takeaway from that is when you fail to meet these regulations, you then lose money. So not only is it not an increase, oftentimes for those poor, minority, immigrant communities, it became a decrease. And then have those other effects inside of the classroom that y'all did a really good job of outlining. Make sense? Awesome. So, 2009. We have hope back with Obama. All right, so Obama took the top-down approach further with Race to the Top. New sort of Race to the Top. What did that do? I have no idea. Someone please tell me. What does it sound like it did?
It made it so that it's sparing competition within school districts so that high performing school districts would receive additional grants. And that was usually done through high stakes testing, standardized testing, and stuff like that.
Yeah. So it took $4.35 billion in congressionally approved funds, and it held competitions among states and provided resources to winners of those competitions to pursue the Obama administration's priorities, which was develop state data systems, turn around the bottom 5% of schools, adopt or create high-quality college and career-ready standards, and establish and implement teacher evaluation systems, linked to student outcomes. So we can go over those again. Develop state data systems, so just states have to gather more data about how their education systems are working. Turn around the bottom 5% of schools, so this is similar to LBJ's Great Society, make the worst schools better. Adopt or create high-quality college and career-ready standards, so make sure that the high school education you're receiving is not necessarily linked to test scores, but is linked to can you get into a good college, or can you go to a vocational school or enter into the workforce after high school. And establish and implement teacher evaluation systems linked to student outcomes. This is the one that really grinds Turner's gears. Let's talk about that last one for just a second. It's really connected to everything that y'all said about the effect of No Child Left Behind on the classroom. How?
So would it determine like teacher's salary and benefits based on other students?
Yeah, so what are teachers now incentivized to do?
Or the things
That's a little vague. Okay. Yeah? Yeah,
Not necessarily, not even just teaching to the test, but going the extra length to like things like, you know, doing things like illegal things like cheaper than helping students on those type of
yeah, there's actually a scandal in the Atlanta public school system, or might not have been Atlanta, but it was in Georgia, public school system, where it was reported that there was a shockingly high number of teachers who were helping students cheat on tests so they would be evaluated as high-quality teachers. You're smiling and laughing, you're just like, yeah, that's awesome. It was not awesome. It was not really the great result of racing to the top that was intended. But anyways, 19 states won these competitions and began to undertake the required changes. Many states that did not win still adopt one or more of the policies, aligning themselves with the administration's priorities. Does that all make sense? So, yeah?
For states one, and how does access to education for lower income communities in those states like, how is that affected states who didn't?
I do not know, and the way it affected lower income areas was if you received this grant money, it was supposed to be targeted and turning around the bottom 5% of schools. So ideally it was this money, like in the original ESEA, is earmarked towards getting those schools up to the top.
And the ones who didn't win.
The ones who didn't win, quote, voluntarily adopted some of the same standards of the administration, but didn't get the money. Yeah. All right. Yes.
So the top schools win and the money goes to bottom schools.
Yes.
It's such a much bigger area.
Yes.
Like the top schools would like subsidize.
Well, so top schools win. Remember, it's the states in the competition. So the states win because of the top schools, but then the states take the money and they give it to them. All right. We only have 0 minutes left, so we have to get to two things really quickly. 2015, the Every Student Succeeds Act. God, this legislation has the best names. In 2015, under pressure from education groups and the public, Congress passed with bipartisan support, doubt it, the Every Student Succeeds Act. The ESSA reduced the federal role in school accountability. So we're actually seeing a backpedaling. It eliminated the objective of 100% proficiency and omitted requirements for teacher evaluation. The student testing requirements remained, as did a requirement that states intervene in some fashion in their lowest performing 5% schools, but states regained control over how those schools would be identified and what form those interventions would take. So we see a return of a lot of control to the states. Does that make sense? Okay. So I have two other things to kind of say. One is, throughout this history, we've seen the push and pull of a lot of different forces, ideologies, philosophies about education, and the way that relates to how the powers are allocated between the state and federal government. Do you all agree with that statement? In later lectures, what I want you to think about is not what happened, but why did these things happen? So we've done a pretty good job outlining the history of the balance between state and federal education policy. But when you listen to some of these lectures, like Sean's lecture, and when you hear about what ideologies say about education, how they determine what actors should act, think about how that influenced us over time. Who was in control of power when some of these things happened? Were they liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat? Because that's going to inform a lot of the research in areas that you look for when crafting affirmative and negative arguments. The last thing I have to say is that sadly it is no longer 2015 and we are under a different administration. Y'all all recall the name of Betsy DeVos, which is just fantastic for where we are. And a lot of these things are changing. It's not settled. We have not had a new No Child Left Behind. We've not had a new ESEA yet. There's been no legislation, basically passed at all since January 20th. So you're going to need to look a lot more at what is the executive agency. So in the past, we talked a lot about the court, and we talked a lot about congressional legislation. And obviously, both of those things affect the agencies. But right now, in the past year, you're going to need to look at what is the agency doing. Okay? Sound good? Are there any more questions? All right. So Sean's lecture is going to start at 10:15. Be here promptly. You're not going to want to leave your seat for that one.